Welcome back to our channel. The graphic murder scene in Out of the Past, released in 1947, horrified viewers. But it was astonishing what Robert Mitchum did next. It was buried by Hollywood for decades. Now that the lost video has finally surfaced, it reveals a moment so cunning and morally reprehensible that even Noir fans were taken aback. This scenario was the reason it was locked away, because it went beyond the bounds of depravity, from purposefully placed fingerprints to a hidden corpse. The beginning of something significant was Daniel Menwaring's 1946 book Build My Gallows High. The narrative centered on Red Bailey, a former private investigator who was attempting to move on from his past but was unable to do so. Years prior, he had become involved with Kathy Moffat, a violent lady, and her mobster boyfriend, Whit Sterling. Red is now at a loss since Whit wants him back. As the film would later do, the book alternated between the past and the present. The amusing thing is that Menwaring disliked detective fiction altogether. He detested figuring out who had done it and found them dull. His goal was to write something unusual, something that was less about mystery and more about fate. The story felt so unvarnished because of this. RKO recognized potential in it and purchased the rights for $20,000, a substantial sum for an unpublished novel. Initially, Build My Gallows High was the intended title of the film. It made sense. Red was a man who was powerless to escape his destiny. RKO, however, wanted to be certain that people would actually watch it in 1947. They employed a doctor. To test responses, used the Audience Research Institute by George Gallup. The outcome was unfavorable. Many believed the title sounded melancholy, like a film about executions. That would cause problems at the box office. After much searching, the studio ultimately settled on Out of the Past as the name. In the meantime, the screenplay underwent numerous revisions before the final film was produced. There were too many flashbacks and supporting characters, according to the studio. The author of Double Indemnity, James M. Cain, was brought in to correct it. However, RKO rejected it since his rendition differed so greatly from the original. By making Kathy become yet another stereotypical femme fatale, Cain diminished the appeal in Anne's character. It didn't work. Everything was eventually tidied up by B-movie writer Frank Fenton. Two villains in the book were combined into one by him. It simplified things. He was also the author of some of the most well-known quotes from the film, such as "You're like a leaf that the wind blows from one gutter to another." Despite having a significant impact, he was not given credit. There were still issues with the movie even after the script was finished. Producer Warren Duff obtained permission to shoot at Lake Tahoe for a more realistic feel and was able to arrange 64 days for production, which was uncommon for a noir. And then there was the casting issue. The original candidate for the lead in Out of the Past was Humphrey Bogart, but Warner Brothers wouldn't allow him to work for another studio. The job was given to Robert Mitchum, who was hardly recognized at the time, since they didn't want his celebrity to aid a competition. Everything was altered by that one choice. It felt natural to Mitchum's manner of acting. He portrayed Jeff Bailey as someone who was too worn out to fight against his defeat. He took a puff. He remained composed. And he gave in to his destiny. There was no indication that he was acting. It seemed genuine. Off-screen, he was equally erratic. Joking that it was merely a matter of staying in character, he used marijuana on set. Flying to a location shot was one of the most bizarre things that happened while production. The aircraft crashed, striking an outhouse and crashing through a fence. Mitchum simply got out, cleaned up, and hitched the rest of the way to the set. Later, he chuckled about it and said that the only genuine light in the movie came from individuals smoking cigarettes. He also continued to play practical jokes, such as accusing a reporter of being one of the film's producers while intoxicated. The studio was constantly concerned about his next move, but he was ideal for the part because of that same mindset. When Kirk Douglas portrayed the film's wealthy mobster, Whit Sterling, he was just getting started. He wasn't in the lead. But he made every scene his own. On the outside, his character was courteous, but on the inside, he was angry. He startled everyone by giving Jane Greer such a forceful smack during filming that she nearly toppled over. Because it added to the dread of his character, the filmmaker preserved it even though it wasn't in the script. Douglas and Mitchum were not on good terms behind the scenes. Douglas took acting seriously and never stopped challenging himself. While Mitchum didn't seem to try very hard. Because they both wanted to be the focus of attention, they clashed. Douglas later said that he intended to show Mitchum how superior he was by destroying him. The intensity of their scenes together was increased by that rivalry. However, Jane Greer was on the verge of not being included in the film. The studio's head, Howard Hughes, was upset with her despite the fact that she was bound by a contract with RKO. He chose to punish her by preventing her from obtaining any roles. In fact, he warned her, "You won't work as long as I own this studio." However, Greer managed to retaliate. Hughes saw that he would appear bad if he continued to push her away after she got married and got pregnant. Kathy Moffat is one of the most frightening femme fatale in film history, and he finally allowed her to play the part. Kathy was more than a pretty chick in a slasher movie. She was vicious. While appearing totally innocent, she was able to deceive, control, and even murder without hesitation. Reviewers praised Greer's portrayal of Kathy, describing her as both interesting and disturbing. But in 1947, RKO was having serious problems. It had cost the studio $1.8 million that year. Even if Out of the Past is one of their 39 films, their budget of $1.3 million for this movie was reasonable for them, yet it was still limited. They desired quick, not flawless, filmmaking. Cinematographer Nicolas Musarasa and director Jacques Turner had only 64 days to complete it. To conserve money, they shot most of it on sound stages in Culver City and Hollywood, but they did film a few sequences in Bridgeport, California, and Lake Tahoe. The scenes in Tahoe were a nightmare. In Nevada, the crew had to smuggle equipment across state lines to avoid paying union dues. Filming at Lower Twin Lake was once stopped by local police because the crew lacked the necessary licenses. Everywhere there were financial issues. It wasn't even a bar when Jeff and Kathy first met at the Acapulco bar. It was constructed on RKO's Encino Ranch with props from previous John Wayne westerns. They had a major vehicle chase planned, but they decided to ditch it when they realized they couldn't hire stunt drivers. Rather, they used close-ups of Mitchum's face and tension-building shadows. Then everything changed when Robert Mitchum was jailed in 1948, just before the film's release. A home in Laurel Canyon was raided by the LAPD on September 1st. And saw actress Lila Leeds smoking marijuana with Mitchum. There was a setup. Photographers were given fantastic images of Mitchum and arrested by the police, who had tipped them off. RKO became frightened. They even considered removing parts of his scenes from the film and stopped advertising it. However, Howard Hughes had an alternative. He believed that ticket sales would be boosted by the scandal. Mitchum was indifferent. His 50 days in jail didn't wreck him, on the contrary, it made him even more awesome. While he worked, guards allowed him to smoke, and his mugshot went down in history. With the joke that imprisonment was like Palm Springs minus the riffraff, Life magazine photographed him milking cows when he was incarcerated. It was adored by audiences. Following the controversy, Out of the Past earned $2.1 million. People were eager to watch the prisoner outwit the police. The conviction was overturned in 1951 after attorneys demonstrated that the police had set him up. But Mitchum was unconcerned. He said, "The dirtier they think I am, the better I fit the part." The film's appearance, on the other hand, was one of its unique features. The morality, or lack thereof, of the character was conveyed using lighting in RKO's Prince of Darkness, Musaraka. A prime illustration of Kathy's turning point is when she kills Jeff's companion. She appeared gentle and naive before that, glowing warmly. But the light becomes harsh the instant she kills. Her face is slashed with deep shadows, giving her a menacing appearance. She indicates that she has gone too far by standing in a completely dark doorway. Jeff, however, is mired in his history. In his moments in the petrol station, window-blind shadows fall like bars across his body. He is stuck regardless of what he does. Telling the story with cigarette smoke was one of Musaraka's most audacious strategies. In a pivotal scene, Kathy and Jeff are lying together after sharing a bed. Everything appears blurry as smoke permeates the atmosphere. Studio bosses were not pleased. Turner struggled to hold on to it even though they felt it was excessive. He claimed that the smoke was a metaphor for Jeff and Kathy's reality blindness. Then came a scene that was just too much. Jeff Bailey discovers Leonard Eales's lifeless body as he enters his flat. Jeff would not panic, unlike most individuals. He doesn't shout or flee. He takes a more chill approach. The body is picked up and taken to another residence. He is fully aware of what he is doing. He ruins the murder scene by concealing the body in a different location. The police will now be unable to determine Eales's death time and location. This implies that he, Kathy, or Whit Sterling's criminal gang might all be held accountable. This is the most peculiar part, though. The body is not simply hidden by Jeff. he deliberately leaves his fingerprints behind. To ensure that his prints are discovered by the police, he touches Eel's liquor decanter. He seems to desire to be apprehended, or perhaps he realizes that he is already too far down in this mess to get out. Kathy is meanwhile playing a game of her own. She phones the building management while posing as Eel's secretary, appearing very concerned so that the body is found when she wants it to be. She isn't afraid. She's in charge of everything and making sure it suits her. Everybody in our world is either hunting or being hunted. After it, there's the bank book worth $40,000. All it does is wait to be discovered. Kathy is linked to Fisher's murder, an old murder, because of the money. In reality, Jeff is only allowing Kathy to draw him closer to her, even if he believes that transferring Eel's body will help him survive. The body is more than just an issue that he must dispose of. It is evidence of his and Kathy's being stuck together and unable to move away. Jeff tries to hide the reality. Kathy makes it a weapon. The scene's filming style adds to the overall gloomy atmosphere. There are several shadows in the room. Jeff's visage appears to be caught between good and evil as he pulls the body, with patches of light and black. The tiny closet, which resembles a coffin, is where he conceals Eel's. He doesn't seem to be merely concealing a body. He's engrossed in a crime from which he will never be free. The world seems to be closing in on him as the illumination from below causes shadows to rise up like bars in a prison. The concept of concealing a body in a closet has significance as well. The adage "skeletons in the closet" applies here. Jeff is actually hiding his secrets in the hopes that no one would discover them. The vacant flat where he conceals Eel's, however, is also significant. The fact that each of these characters is hollow on the inside and constantly tries to fill a gap they can never fill serves as a reminder. Jeff appears enormous due to the way the camera moves, like a murderer looming over his prey. However, it also gives him a sense of being trapped and reduces the amount of space around him. He closes the closet door, but the camera remains in the vacant space. It's eerie because of it. Often, the absence of something is more frightening than its presence. Kathy murders Whit off-screen using the same way. Her shadow fills the entire screen as Jeff locates the body. Even shadows have a function in this world. This sequence was nearly removed from the film. The depiction of criminality was subject to stringent Hollywood regulations in those days. Censorship officials felt that Jeff's activities made crime appear too simple and commonplace. When he moved the body, his calmness startled the audience. Censorship office head Joseph Breen detested the camera's intense focus on the body. Violence, he believed, would seem too genuine. RKO the studio wouldn't alter it. In contrast, they did not wish to preserve the film's artistic integrity. Simply put, they didn't want to shell out more cash for reshoots, especially since Howard Hughes was then taking over the studio. Jacques Turner, the director, was the only reason the sequence survived. Was able to circumvent the regulations. Instead of filming Jeff transferring the body, he showed the viewers what happened when he entered and exited the closet. That kept the moment's impact while appeasing the censors. The dialogue itself was meticulously crafted. Kathy tells Jeff, "You're like a dead man," at one point. Although it sounds menacing, it's really a satire about how the censors attempted to keep noir movies clean by avoiding graphic violence. When the film was released, critics couldn't agree on how to interpret this moment. It was disliked by some. According to the New York Times, it was nasty and made crime seem hip. Other than that, Jeff believed he had found love. Kathy appeared like everything he could possibly want: beautiful, charming, and everything. All that changed, however, in a single instant, inside a silent cabin. They had been running, attempting to get away with the dangerous criminal they had crossed, Sterling. Then Jeff's ex-partner, Jack Fisher, discovered them. He had more in mind than retaliation. He was looking for $40,000. He didn't hesitate to make Kathy look bad in order to obtain it. As if he had already won, he laughed and labeled her a cheap piece of baggage. Jeff's response was immediate. After he delivered a blow, the place erupted into mayhem. It was not a staged battle from a movie. It was ugly, gritty, and real. Not a single song. No grandiose remarks, but suddenly there was a single shot before Jeff could intervene. Kathy had grabbed a gun and shot it. Fisher was killed. Jeff looked at her, trying to figure out what had happened, but Kathy didn't appear to be shaken. "You wouldn't have killed him," she added. "He would have opposed us." "He wouldn't." At that moment, Jeff realized the reality. Fisher had not had to be killed by Kathy. Because it kept her in charge and was simpler, she did it. A bank book that was discovered later proved that she had taken Whit's money, which was evidence of her deception. Although Jeff had trusted her, he suddenly saw that she was only considering herself. She had no fear or desperation. Her goal was to maintain her lead. According to critics, Kathy was unique among Femme Fatale because of this. She didn't behave like a victim or plead. She continued as though murder was only a means to an end. Kathy was more than just a manipulator, according to film expert Carol St. Martin. She didn't deceive anyone into complying with her wishes. She took charge of her life and eliminated everybody who stood in her way. Greer had repercussions for playing Kathy. She continued to receive the same types of assignments from studios after Out of the Past. "I was shooting someone by the third act of every script I got," she jokingly said. Kathy's legacy, however, endured. Characters like Catherine Trammell from Basic Instinct retained their vigor decades later. Women who made decisions without looking back, who didn't merely manipulate or beg. In the meantime, Out of the Past's conclusion was startling for its day. In the 1940s, Hollywood films typically ended happily, with justice being done or the hero surviving. The reverse was true with this movie. During a police ambush in the last scene, Kathy shoots Jeff, but the cops shoot her as well before she can flee. Both protagonists pass away in a matter of seconds. For this conclusion, Daniel Manwaring and Jacques Turner, the director and writer, had to battle the studio. The studio refused to let Jeff live, claiming it would destroy the plot. Because the movie was about fate, Jeff couldn't escape it. The Hollywood Production Code, which ensured that films taught moral messages, was also not pleased. They didn't like that Kathy had no remorse and was purely nasty. Turner would not alter it, however. In a noir movie like this, fate always prevails. The final shootout is much more horrific because of how it takes place. Kathy is not angry enough to kill Jeff. She acts in this way because she still desires to be in charge. She says, "You're no good. And neither am I," looking him in the eye. After that, she is killed by the cops in a frantic gunfight. There are only 2 people dead in the front seat of a car, no sense of justice or triumph. It was a startling moment, particularly in the wake of World War II. When people began to doubt traditional notions of heroes and villains. This moment, according to several reviewers, encapsulated the mood of the period. It demonstrated how arbitrary and harsh life may be, which is why Roger Ebert referred to it as terribly beautiful. Before this, other films had terrible endings, but in Casablanca, for instance, the hero's sacrifice had significance. This was merely a dead end. Chinatown and other later films imitated this concept, where the protagonist is unable to avoid his fate no matter what he does. In Out of the Past, Jeff and Kathy's relationship was a deft method of violating the Hays Code without really doing so. The code was very rigorous. Films were unable to depict affairs or failed to hold offenders accountable. Jacques Turner, the director, and Daniel Manwaring, the writer, circumvented these regulations by presenting the material in a nuanced manner. Kathy emerges from the sun in a white dress when Jeff first sees her in Mexico. The shadows partially obscure her face. They are clearly lovers based on the way the scenes feel, the slow parts, and Kathy's speech, even if they don't show them kissing or sharing a bed. Both of them are obviously aware that they are in too deep when she declares, "You're no good, and neither am I." Kathy's conclusion ought to have violated the code entirely. According to the norms, evil persons must be punished, but Kathy murders Jeff. Then, in a police gunfight, he dies. The issue is that she doesn't feel like a bad guy. She seems to be a tragic figure. Despite the censorship office's disapproval, RKO managed to retain it. They got away with it by making her death appear to be chaos rather than retribution. The movie also broke the norms with Jeff's response to everything. According to the guideline, films were to demonstrate how poor decisions have negative effects. Jeff, however, never holds Kathy accountable. Rather, he simply accepts it. He's not passing judgment on her when he tells her that she's like a leaf that the wind tosses from gutter to gutter. He's merely stating that this is the current situation. There were issues with the censors as well because of Kathy's dominance over men. Her ability to easily influence men and her status as more than simply a love interest bothered them. She said to Jeff in the original draft of the script, "I'd kill to keep you." That was excessive. They reworded it to "I don't want to die," which gave the impression that she was more desperate than dangerous. However, the movie still demonstrated her strength despite these adjustments. In a pivotal sequence, Sarah encounters Jeff in a dim alley. As she tells him, "You belong to me," a neon sign partially illuminates her face. The censors permitted it because there is no physical contact. However, it is evident from the way the scene unfolds that she is in charge. Jeff also breached the rules by not feeling guilty. Heroes, according to the Hays Code, had to be decent individuals who took responsibility for their actions. Jeff doesn't. Some of his comments were removed by the studio due to censorship, such as when he informs them that money is only a tool, like a rifle. They took it down because it painted crime as being too simple. However, rather than altering the movie, the studio preserved Mitchum's facial expressions. Jeff merely smirks as he sees Kathy murder Fisher in one episode. There's nothing he says. But one sneer conveys all the information to the audience. Even the conclusion was dangerous. To make Jeff appear better than he actually was, the deaf-mute child tells in tales. The censorship office let it to go unnoticed by the code because they interpreted it as a cautionary tale about lying rather than a celebration of it. Censors were far more severe outside the United States. In France, the close-ups of Fisher's bleeding face and her composedly reloading the gun were reduced from the 45-second scene of Kathy killing him to 15 seconds. Because it painted post-war administrations as unscrupulous, a whole plotline regarding tax theft and blackmail was dropped in Britain. Ironically, this made the movie's love story seem even more sinister because, in the absence of those criminal aspects, Jeff and Kathy's doomed romance was all that remained. They eliminated any indication that Jeff and Kathy shared a San Francisco residence by cutting 17 minutes in West Germany. Cutting Jeff's sarcastic comment to wit and removing a close-up of a car covered in bullets during the climactic shootout. You are an entrepreneur. They're drafting new laws for you, I've heard. These changes stripped the film of much of its deeper meaning and reduced it to a straightforward crime thriller. Ironically, though, French filmmakers were influenced by these mutilated versions. A prominent member of the French New Wave, Jean-Pierre Melville, praised the way the jumbled version gave the narrative a sense of mystery and fragmentation. The 1947 film Out of the Past only made $90,000 in profit, which wasn't much even in those days. However, that figure doesn't fully capture the situation. The film's production company, RKO Radio Pictures, was in serious danger. It lost $1.8 million in that same year. Enough to produce 3 high-profile films. Perhaps a dozen smaller ones that did make money. Movie theaters were crowded at the time. Approximately 90 million Americans went to the movies each week, but they were looking for something enjoyable and light. People favored comedies starring Bing Crosby or films like Forever Amber, the year's biggest hit. However, it was not the case in the past. The film depicted a world in which even strong sunlight seemed dismal and there was no way out. And menacing. Critics couldn't agree on what to think when it first came out. Robert Mitchum's performance was praised by New York Times reporter Bosley Crowther, who described it as delightfully cheeky. However, he also acknowledged that he was unaware of what was happening. He even claimed that attempting to solve it was difficult in and of itself. It was described by Variety as a hard-boiled melodrama with plenty of suspense. However, reviews were everywhere. Critics now have a fresh perspective. They refer to it as magnificent nonsense and even effortless. The manner the film blended several genres was the source of the confusion. It was a doomed love story as well as a noir movie. A western about fate catching up to someone who sought to elude it, in a way. The second act, which took place in San Francisco, really irritated people at the time. A staged murder, betrayals, and tax documents compounded the scenario. And viewers were confused. Even Jeff Bailey, played by Mitchum, seems perplexed when he remarks, "I think I'm in a frame." However, it was ultimately recognized by critics that the film's convoluted plot was the main focus. It was about how life felt uncertain and full of pitfalls after the war, not just about a crime. According to Roger Ebert, the film's swirling smoke perfectly matched its moral cloud, making it the greatest cigarette-smoking movie of all time. Nobody was really innocent, and nothing was obvious. Opinions were likewise divided by Jane Greer's performance. She was deemed attractive and fashionable by Variety, but some critics felt she was lacking and likened her to Barbara Stanwyck from Double Indemnity. At the time, nobody knew how to interpret her character, Kathy Moffat. Although her shifting allegiances appeared arbitrary and unpersuasive, people began to view her role differently in the 1970s as second-wave feminism gained traction. Kathy was no longer viewed as another femme fatale, but rather as a woman who used her appearance to her advantage. What appeared to be inconsistency or weakness was suddenly seen as strategy.